Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
Atimefortruthshow is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard, you don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart, yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Time for Truth Show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff. It's a pleasure to be back with you again tonight, to that space where you can actually get information that's going to transform and simplify your life. And before we start tonight's program, I wanted to answer a question because many of you have been asking, how do we become members? Very simple. Click on YouTube. Go A Time for Truth Show. Go to A Time for Truth Show. Click on that and then hit your subscribe button. You'll be availed of all the last 5 years or so of episodes and segments. We'd love to have you as one of our members. So tonight we're going to cover something that many people complain about: energy. How do I get more energy to go through my daily tasks, finish those projects that I never seem to get done? How do I avoid those stresses and complications and negativity that I really don't want, that drains me, that saps my energy? How do I remain positive? How do I avoid just being down? And so I think you're going to find these episodes very informative. We'll actually have it in two parts, part 1 and part 2. This will be part 1. And we'll start with part 1, and we're going to put the beginning of the first slide on part 1. And we'll start with this. Why this? Because what does this elicit? What do you feel when you see this image? Are you tense or are you relaxed? Do you look and curious and desire to see more? Or are you resisting and moving away from? Obviously, no, it's very aesthetic, it's nature, it's beautiful. And there's an energy that exudes even just from the image on the screen. How is that happening? And this is what we're going to be going over in this presentation. And we'll be going over something called energies or emotional tones that as human beings we experience, that we perceive, that paint and color our day, either in a positive way, sometimes in a negative fashion. We'll be going over the implications of an emotional tone scale that you see goes from enthusiasm down to apathy, and below apathy, death. And there you see the clowns on each side, from the enthusiasm and cheerfulness of the top of the scale to the apathy and despondency that you see on the bottom right. So, during the course of our day, I'm sure you all have gone through this. As I'm a periodontal implant surgeon for 45 years now, I place some pictures from the office because sometimes we have to deal with situations that are very difficult. hostile patients, fearful patients. They get angry, not necessarily angry at us, but just angry at the situation, or frustrated, negative emotions. But we need to do something about that. We need to know how to handle them. They happen in our lives. They happen anywhere. It's not relegated just to a dental office. It happens in families. It happens in different professions. It happens daily life, on the expressway when somebody beeps their horn at you in a very angry fashion. And so we want to take a look at what's happening here. We'll take it and break it apart into different segments. We'll talk about communication. And so we want to put a study from the National Institute of Health, where basically there's a growing body of research combining and examining different emotions. And what was found, that positive and negative emotions affected our social support, our daily interactions, and that the negative had a deleterious impact on our mental health. And some investigators actually have been reporting that negative social interactions may in fact have more potent and deleterious effects on our well-being, emotionally, mentally, and that even though we have positive interactions, that sometimes the negativity overwhelms us. And you know, there's a communication. You see in the diagram, one person, when they initiate the conversation, is at the causative end of the conversation, and the person listening is receiving at the effect end of the conversation. And there's an intention that goes across. Is that intention positive? Is the intention negative? As you see in this NIH study, pointing out the negative interaction causing deleterious impacts on our mental health. So, let's take a look now and realize that all things in the universe vibrate. Even our human body. Any body vibrates, has a frequency of vibration. And in the pink area of that top right, you see the vibration of the human body, which is around 10 hertz. And why the pink area is being shown is because when you approximate that vibration, what happens, you get something called resonance. And you get a corresponding resonance frequency, which means that the frequency of the body with a different frequency can go into an agreement, can go into a harmonious vibration. And in that state, that harmonious vibration, energy can either come in or energy can go out. If it comes in, like when you're pushing someone on a swing and they're going up and down, and each time they come down, you push at the same frequency, you augment, so you go higher and higher. But you can also take away and go lower and lower, or cause what we would call stress. We call losing our energy. I feel drained somehow. I'm just tired. I don't know, at the beginning of the day I was fine, and now I'm not. So when we experience these negative emotions and the negative frequencies that take away, the bottom left is the brain, and the brain also has frequencies. And those different waves of frequency, the gamma, the beta, the alpha, the theta, the delta, have different meanings and mechanical and physiological and nervous interactions within our bodies, which again can either lead to a very good feeling or a very negative feeling. And you look at the human being, you can look at him as a driver, and then you can look at the body and the brain as kind of like, let's say, the car with a computer on board, and as we go through the day. But obviously, if the car is going to be impacted by negative energy, something's going to happen, and the driver is going to be shocked. If it's a good thing, he'll be very happy because he got to work early. It can be one or the other, as I had mentioned to you. So which one happens depends on whether it's a positive interaction or a negative interaction, or what we would call intention. the intention of that communication. But it's important to realize that that synchronicity or that harmonious vibration causes a resonance, which means now you're in agreement with the other person and things can occur. They can be positive or they can be negative. So let's continue. It's important to realize that our emotions have frequencies. They have wavelengths. They're not imaginary. They're actually energy manifestations. And when we think something, then we think of something, let's say, positive, a wedding, a great sporting event that we saw or participated in, a dance where we danced with our partner and we really love what we did. Well, what happens is the frequency goes higher. And as the frequency goes higher, you feel that vibe, what people call vibe, we're in sync, and we have that energy. And now we have that resonance we talked about on the previous slide, but it's a very positive thing because we're all in accord. At the wedding, we're all in accord on the beautiful part of the wedding. In the song with our partner, we're in agreement on how we want to move, and the music sounds wonderful, and everything is going to an upward swing of that resonance, of that frequency. And there you see on the upper diagram how when we go up from lower emotions like apathy, grief, fear, and we go up to higher emotions like joy, exhilaration, aesthetic, you see that the frequencies expand. And as they expand, we get a more aware situation, a more harmonious situation, or exhilarated, a more positive experience. As we go down, it becomes less of a frequency, more dense, less space, and more stressful, more negative, not as much opportunity. We have to also realize the wavelengths, because wavelengths can differ. And today we were listening, my wife and I, to Elvis Presley. And when he sang, his wavelength was so broad, as you see on the left side of that lower diagram. Very broad wavelength to his voice. A lot of effort, a lot of effects. Very little effort to him, but very aesthetic, very penetrating. His voice always was very penetrating, very interesting voice, much like other great singers out that we've experienced in our lives. And on the right, you see the scale again, this emotional tone scale that was developed by Hubbard. And this scale, we're going to correlate as we go on to this presentation, and we look at these different emotions and how they impact our lives, and how we have to realize, well, what do we do with the negative? And how do we improve the positive? Or how do we change the negative to the positive? What are the actions that we should take? So let's first now, as we do all of this, realize that this is not hypothetical. This is not a philosophy, but it's an actual scientific truth, because it shows about truths. And so we're going to quote you the Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation article of 2023, very recent, from the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. And let's see what Dr. Murthy actually wanted to relay to us. And he said that in his review of the scientific literature, that he found confirmation of what he was hearing. That about 1 in 2 American adults experience loneliness. And that was even before COVID had hit us. And so he started looking, because he started hearing this complaint. And as he started researching the science and the articles and the research done scientifically, he started finding the health consequences, where he mentions that loneliness is more than a bad feeling, and that it harms not just the individual, but very interesting, he said, the society itself. And he said that the loneliness was associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death and that the impact of being socially disconnected was similar to that caused by smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now we want to pause right here and start correlating everything that we've talked about. So we talked about frequencies, we talked about wavelengths, a lot of scientific jargon, right? And that it was part of communication and how we were experiencing it, and some was positive and exhilarating, and some was stressful and negative. And here you see from the Surgeon General talking about societal consequences and individual consequences, and these coming from social interaction, a lack of social interaction. But what is a social interaction but what we've been speaking about? It's communication. It's being in the presence of another human being. And he found that the lack of it caused a negative impact, and that more of that interaction caused a positive. Now, obviously, he was talking about more positive interaction, because you can communicate someone and they're very negative and destructive towards you, and that's not going to be what he was talking about. He's talking about a positive interaction, to want to be around human beings, to have humanity. The word humanity by itself being very positive, the connotation that it really brings out and results in, versus stress, a stressful situation in communication, which is not something we would want. He also mentioned that these effects and lack of human interaction was harming our societies. And it was felt in the schools, in businesses, in civic organizations, really wherever we joined and got together as human beings, that this was affecting us, the lack of social interaction, and that it was affecting our productivity, and it's affecting our daily lives. And so the Surgeon General made a call to action, and he stated, and these are quotes we see in front of you, "Given the profound consequences of loneliness and isolation, we have an opportunity and an obligation to make the same investments in addressing social connection that we have made in addressing tobacco use, obesity, and the drug addiction crisis." Very profound that he said we have an obligation to invest time, which we're doing on this show today for you. And what did he say was the risk of not living up to our obligation? That we will pay an ever-increasing price in the form of our individual and collective health and well-being. We will continue to divide until we can no longer stand as a community or even as a country. And that we're going to further retreat, further isolate, further individuate, angry, sick, and alone. So we want to see that what the Surgeon General pointed out to you from a medical scientific perspective totally is going to correlate what we're talking about with communication, these frequencies, and these wavelengths and vibrations. Let's look at the formula of communication again, because obviously we're communicating for this to occur. And then when we socially interact, we're getting communication. And that negative communication is not pleasant to experience because it may be too harsh, or maybe not enough, or maybe there's no attention being paid. And the content of the communication is important. Maybe the person is very selfish and self-centered, or is it something that is more involving and for the benefit of all, in which case then the effect is positive. So we have to look at what the intention is of that communication that we're experiencing from that other human being, or that other group, or even social media, or even a movie, or maybe just being on the highway. What is the intention that we're feeling? And realize that the wavelengths are carrying that intention to us. Let's take another scientific study from another organization very important in our country, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, on social connection again. And their conclusion, the social isolation and loneliness increases a person's risk for heart disease and stroke, for diabetes, for depression and anxiety, for suicide, for dementia, and earlier death. So now we have the Surgeon General, we have the CDC, and we see a repeating result that our interaction is very important. And is it positive or is it negative and stressful? Is it a good vibe or is it a negative vibe? Are we in sync for good reasons or not? So let's take a look at our other institution in our country, very important, the National Institute of Health and the Harvard Health Publishing Journal. And from these sources, we see first the geometry of emotions, how emotions occur. And we see that from the NIH about chakras and acupuncture and meridians. What does all this mean? Well, it means that we actually have energy flows in our bodies and that our thoughts do impact these. And then when we're communicating, interacting, if we have positive intentions and we're relating positive information, the experiences we'll gain will be exhilarating, cheerful, happy, constructive. And if we're receiving negative interaction or unhappy or destructive or not productive communications or effects, then our meridians and chakras and energy flows and nervous system and however different ways we want to speak about it, the important thing is to realize not so much the names, but the effect of this communication. And that it's being imparted from one to another, whether it's an organization or a person to another, or the media to another, is having an effect. And that traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture have always realized that somehow by modifying these frequencies and these energies, that the nervous system and the body improved. So we get back and we realize that we should pay more attention to communication. But we realize the importance of avoiding stressful communication because of all the different findings, systems, philosophies that you see that are really from all over the world in different philosophies, Hindu, Buddhist, different countries, different scientific journals, coming over and over again. The same result, the same understanding, that effective communication is important. And what is the definition of communication? It's the consideration and the action of impelling, which means just pushing an impulse or a particle, an idea, a thought, a concept, from a beginning point, one person, across a distance to another. And that effective communication has the intention of bringing into being at the receipt or effect point, the person listening, an understanding. Saying, oh yeah, that's what you meant. I duplicate that. I understand that. I know where you're heading. And you understand what that other person was trying to tell you. And if it's a positive intention, you're both happier and you will lead to a higher level. But let's go over one more article, again with science. This is regarding social media. And this article, again from the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, warning of the mental health effects of social media on our youth. That the rise in the use of social media platforms proved to be harmful, increasing anxiety, depression, and obviously as we increase that, what's going to happen? You're going to have people who are going to be stressed, who are not going to be calm, who are going to take drugs, who are going to probably go off on their own, or maybe drink, or maybe just do something that's not going to be positive. If it goes on and on and on, now you can understand why we've started to get more suicides, and why drugs have become so prevalent in our society. So what is the impact that this has? If this is social media, what would the impact be on you with social media, with a toxic personality, a negative, angry personality? Obviously, that also would affect you. The media is just a more encompassing and more chronic, more overwhelming, because our youth have become so used to going on and staying online, staying on their cell phones. But really, the effect would be the same if you were exposed to a toxic personality continuously at your work. If someone was constantly criticizing you and putting you down. Maybe you had someone like that in your life. As I'm talking, you're thinking about it, and you're saying, well, what do I do, Dr. Fialkoff? Well, that's part 2 that's coming up. But let's finish off part 1. So we're looking at effective communication. You see one person thinking of a star, the person listening at the receipt point duplicates and understands, oh, you're talking about a star. And that's an effective communication, because what was emanated has been received, what he spoke about was understood and listened to, and it was positive. It was something that improved life, that brought an increase in energy, that brought more possibilities and opportunities like we have on this show, Attain for Truth show. And so we want to take a look then that this effective communication involves listening. Not listening just to shut someone up, say, oh, okay, great, thanks for telling me. Or not really listening and watching something on your cell phone or on the screen while you're supposedly listening. But listening with attention. Attention to really understand what that person is telling you. Listening is such an important part of communication. And then once you really have listened, usually the other person calms down, relaxes, because finally they really heard. Probably as you're thinking about this, you're probably laughing. Yeah, that happened with my wife. That happened with my boyfriend. That happened with my boss when I finally listened to him. Or thank God my boss listened to me and he finally understood. And then the last part for this show, then we have to acknowledge that person. Not say, oh yeah, I heard you. Oh, I knew that before. Oh yeah, you've told me that 100 times. No, that's not an acknowledgement, what we mean by acknowledgement. That's more of an invalidation. We want to let them know that what they did or gave to us, that we received it. Whether it was a gift, a service, a message. You know, if you got a good message, thank you for sending the message in return as a text. If someone helped you and painted your room, wow, thank you for painting. The room looks great. If someone gave you a gift for a wedding, wow, that's such a great gift. You send them a thank you card. That's normal. But we want to practice those two things as we end this show. Listening to really hear what the person is saying and acknowledging them, to really letting them know that we understood them. So we've come to the end of part 1. And part 2, we're going to go a little more now in depth. Now that we know the science, and that we're not talking about philosophies, but science, we're going to go into the science of how do we handle this? How do we decrease stress? How do I have more energy? How do I have a happier day? Who knows? A happier life. I hope you've enjoyed part 1 of this show. Stay tuned as we go into part 2 on the Time for Truth show.
This show was sponsored by Attain for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep at your feet.